Hello and welcome back to another episode of Come Over for Dinner. I'm so excited you're joining me today. Today I have a very special guest all the way from Chicago. She is married with 3 young children, a boy and 2 girls. The oldest is in second grade. I am so excited to have her today. She is going to tell us all about her life, but especially about her time in Switzerland, where she and her husband were on staff at L'Abri. So welcome, Valerie.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here. This is really a
Well,
privilege. Thanks.
thank you. Thank you for joining me. Tell us a little bit about your life in Chicago and before that in Switzerland.
Yeah. I did grow up in Chicago. My mom teaches at a college here. She's been there for like 50 years. She's been teaching forever. And it's a Christian school. And so part of my education, I went there. And one of the things that I had to do when I was a Christian education major was find a ministry to do research at when I was in college. And so I decided the short version of the story is I decided to go to L'Abri because I had friends who went to L'Abri. Now, for those who don't know, L'Abri is a French term that means the shelter. That's what it means. And it's a ministry that was started in the 50s by Francis and Edith Schaeffer. And Francis and Edith Schaeffer, if you're not familiar with them, Francis Schaeffer was particularly well known kind of in the 80s and 90s, which is maybe the peak of 70s, 80s, 90s, peak of his heyday as a kind of Christian worldview philosopher. But he and his wife began this ministry in post-World War II Europe way back in the 50s. They went there originally to run Christian camps, like Bible camps for post-war children in Europe, ran into several different issues because of their witnessing, and eventually moved to a particular canton that was easier for them to just live their life the way they needed to live it and do the things that God was calling them to do. And their daughter, their oldest daughter, had gone to college there in Lausanne in Switzerland and started bringing friends back to school or back to her home, her family's home, to discuss issues regarding Christianity with her father. When the Schaeffers children were starting to hit college, their eldest daughter would bring her friends from school who had questions about God. Kind of post-World War II Europe, a lot of people were asking sort of existential questions, and maybe a lot of them were coming. I mean, Switzerland is a Protestant country, big history, of course, from the Protestant Reformation, but a lot of them were just dealing with fallout from the war and questions about God. And Schaeffer would really engage with them, and more people started coming. And his ministry God really blessed it in the kind of during the Jesus People movement, floods of people started coming to their home, and it became a more formalized kind of a ministry. They lived in a really big house, and then they acquired various properties near their own house and started hosting, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 people at a time. So
That's
that was
incredible.
that was sort of the 60s. Like you think about, like if you ever saw that Jesus Revolution movie, there's just this time when the Spirit is sort of moving among people and they're just coming. It's very informal. Nothing is structured. It's very disorganized, so they had to kind of get their heads around what God was up to and how to responsibly handle all these opportunities, but the Lord has blessed this ministry. And then now the questions that people come with are very similar to what they came with then. I would say like 50% apologetics types of questions, where people are asking about the nature of the Bible or the nature of the goodness of God, arguments for God's existence. And then also people have emotional questions, or they maybe have hit some kind of crisis in their life and they need a little bit of help walking through that crisis, or they're dealing with some stuff from their church or from their family. And so L'Abri kind of ministers to that. And what has turned into is that largely the population that comes are people who are college student age or post-college student age or in a gap year. So most of the people are between 18 and 25 who are at L'Abri. They still are working with groups of 30 to 40 at a time, much more manageable. What I found when I was there as a student and then when we returned to join the staff was that hospitality is like the secret sauce of L'Abri, and that really came from Edith, from the mother and the family, that her heart and she had a really robust ministry background too, and a really interesting story herself. interesting perspective on things. And so I've really learned a lot from her and from her legacy in hosting people and what evangelism and hospitality kind of looks like.
That is an incredible story. And it's so true that the way that you invite people in first is through hospitality. It's usually the most effective way to get to know someone and to help them to understand that you care about them as a person, not just in telling them about Jesus or something,
Right.
People do want to know that you care about them and who they are as you're inviting them into your home. So hospitality is definitely the key, the secret sauce, as you said.
Yeah. Schaeffer called love the final apologetic. So he sort of said, like, what are we doing? If you don't actually care about these people, don't waste their time or yours. You can have a list of arguments for whatever it is you're trying to persuade them about. That's what you need to start there.
Yeah, people feel very cared for when you invite them into a home that's beautiful, that has hot food on the table and smiling people to welcome them in and make them feel at home for sure.
Right.
So you and your husband were there working, I guess this is before children, and you were working. How does the place run now? Is there someone who owns it, so to speak? Because the Schaeffers are no longer there.
Well, there's descendants. So that's a good question. So the property is owned, from what I understand, by the Libri Foundation. So they did develop a structure, a ministry foundation, they formalize things eventually. But the way that it works is that there's sort of 3 tiers of participants in the community. There are the workers, they call them workers. And then there are helpers. And those are sort of like junior staff members. They're people who have been students, and then there are students. So students are the folks that are coming because they have questions that they want to research while they're there at Libri. There's a large library of recordings of Schaeffer's teachings, all the other staff workers' teachings since him, and then also just tons of resources from philosophy to theology to art to questions regarding science and Christianity. And then students spend half their day researching their questions and half the day assisting with the household upkeep of the campus. So it's a whole campus now. It's on the side of this mountain in this little dairy village in Switzerland. It's very remote in a certain way, but in another way, kind of accessible through public transportation. But they're very old, like buildings from the 1700s. They all require a lot of upkeep and care. And so the students spend half their day in sort of that kind of work, and then half their day studying. And then they meet once a week with a worker who is sort of like a lecturer or a tutor that helps them sort of organize their thoughts and points them in the right direction for different resources and engages with them about their questions. And then at lunch every day, they come together for what they call formal lunches, where they have like a Socratic dialogue about a particular issue. And they have breakfast together and dinner together. So for lunch, they break into usually 2 or 3 small groups of 14 to 16 students. But breakfast and dinner is everybody together. And then some dinners there are everybody plus the neighbors. And students usually come and they stay for like 6 to 8 to 12 weeks. It just sort of depends. People can come and stay a couple of nights. But if they really want to dig into those questions, they'll stay for longer and really plug in. And it's a sort of dormitory kind of a situation where men and women are roomed together and they kind of live life together. There's a couple of accommodations for married couples and families, but generally they're single people who come.
That is so interesting. Do people go a lot of times in the summertime? Or do they just go all year long? Is it all year long about the same amount of people? Or is there just a lot more people who go, say, for a summer trip?
Yeah, I think that there probably are higher numbers in the summer. They have a spring or they call it winter term, summer term, and fall term. And again, those terms, so they try to organize their dates now according to the Schengen requirements for visa stays in Europe, because there's rules about like Americans right now. Most of maybe not most, 50% of who comes are Americans, and the rest are from all over the world. And so Americans, though, in Switzerland, they're not supposed to stay longer than 90 days consecutively. And so they try to organize terms to accommodate some of those requirements that come from the European Union. recently. But yeah, anyway, so they'll come in batches. And then, like different Christian universities might send groups of students like in during their January terms or J terms, if they have like a trimester sort of a setup. So I would say the summer is busiest with a lot of turnover because there are a lot of college kids that like to backpack through Europe in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so those numbers can get really high, but they don't have as much longevity. Like the students aren't staying for as long. They'll stay for shorter bits. So there's a higher turnover for the workers. People are more digging in, for a semester or something in that fall and winter term. So they come for various amounts of time. But if you ever go to the SwissLibrary.org website, you'll see that there's different terms or different date structures, and then they'll kind of say, you can come for as little or as long as you want. You can just come for a day, and you'll be barely dipping your toe in. You're not going to have your mind blown probably in a day, except that it's very beautiful.
I can
exquisitely
imagine.
beautiful. And so sometimes people just want to see it,
Oh, I know.
So,
Switzerland was always at the top of my list of places to see when I was young. And I did go as a teenager to Switzerland and Germany for a mission trip, mostly Germany, Eastern Germany.
Okay.
After the Berlin Wall had fallen, there was
a
a youth camp over in Eastern Germany that I was with Teen Missions for a summer. And it was so much fun, but we did what was called a debrief in Switzerland a week after the whole trip was over. And it was as incredible as I imagined it would be, picturesque. And I have always wanted to go back. It is just breathtaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the jobs you have there or had there, I can imagine, has to do with food. All these people coming, besides upkeeping the grounds and the property, you definitely have jobs in the kitchen. You mentioned that for dinner, if you have 40 to 50 people, you have a budget you have to stick to. And it's sometimes you are trying to get it to $2 per person, which seems unimaginable.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the creativity it took to menu plan on that sort of budget.
Yeah. So a little bit of context for that is that Edith Schaeffer, the mother, who was she's like the heart of L'Abri. I would say that Frances Schaeffer's like the brain, Edith's like the heart, if you want to put it that way. She grew up as a missionary with China Inland Mission, which is started, I think, by Hudson Taylor. And they had this philosophy of ministry that you don't support raise. Instead, you pray for the Lord to provide your resources. So, some ministries will go through these seasons of fundraising. It's actually written into L'Abri's bylaws that they don't do that. They're not even allowed to. What they do is they have a really dedicated time of prayer every Monday. They come together for prayer. And then usually once a term, they have days of prayer and fasting for the Lord to provide for the work, which he has done for over 50 years. So I really learned a lot about God's provision through that ministry. But that was their particular philosophy. But what comes with that is just a real focus on resourcefulness and trying to use your resources really responsibly. And because so many students are quite limited in what they're able to pay, because they had a fee rate, they had a rate, and then some people just weren't able to meet it, but nobody was just shown the door, and so they would say, could we try to keep our budget to 2 Swiss francs a head? Well, 2 Swiss francs when I was at L'Abri was pretty equivalent to $2 American, which felt nigh impossible. Food is expensive, right? But there were 2 grocery stores in Switzerland that some places in the United States have them here, and that was Aldi and Lidl, which they weren't there when I was there originally as a student, but they were there when we came back on staff. And Aldi and Lidl were our lifesavers for budget buys. But also, we had to find really creative ways to incorporate protein, because you can make a lot of mac and cheese on $2 a head. You can make a lot of cabbage soup on $2 a head, but you also need to help people, feel full. And especially a lot of, when you're hill climbing, like you're living on a 45-degree angle, it feels like they're in the mountains. And so you're getting a lot of exercise just by being around, by walking from one house to another. It feels kind of extreme. And so you just need to find ways to meet their requirements. And so something that I would do is, you realize like buying the whole chicken is cheaper than buying chicken breast, for instance, And so one of the recipes that I was going to bring up, it required boiling a chicken. The other thing was that you'd maybe do a vegetarian meal for 1 or 2 meals a day, and then try to have, a meat protein in the other meal. And so there are different ways that we created that, but you were never giving anybody, unless a student wanted to spring for burgers for the whole community, which usually that would happen once or twice a semester. Somebody's just like, I'm just dying for burgers, or I just really want to have Thanksgiving dinner. Can I please pay for the turkeys? That kind of thing. But normally you wouldn't have like a meat protein main. It would be like in a soup, or it would be in a casserole or a pizza or something that would stretch it. So that's kind of how we met those requirements. We also had a very structured sort of grocery shopping situation where we had these Excel spreadsheets. We had our staples, and then every worker who was responsible for meals would calculate, the staples didn't necessarily always have to be a part of that 2-person ahead. Does that make sense? Budget. And so you had your regular staples that we were always buying and replenishing. And then for your formal meals or for your dinners, you would have the 2 Swiss francs ahead that you would realize that there were certain things that you could always do, and you would make it work. But what I quickly realized is we weren't serving fruit salad. We weren't serving, we weren't going to serve chicken breast to everybody, because that was just going to be too much. So
right.
Yeah.
That still reminds me of the teen missions trip, because the food was very carefully planned out, because they were feeding a large group of teenagers. We were responsible for, or whoever the coordinators were responsible for feeding the entire group. And it was very good food, but it was, yes, you weren't getting an entire steak or, whatever. It was,
you're right.
The protein was cut into smaller pieces and put in, say, chicken and rice, or, some carbs to go with it, or in a soup. I celebrated my 16th birthday in Germany, and I was asked, what do you want for your birthday meal? And I hadn't had pizza. It's like pizza.
Yeah, of course.
And probably chocolate cake or something. And I just said it thinking, we have set meals and it's all planned out, and I'm not going to get pizza. I showed up to dinner that night and they had done pizza. Somehow they had come up, which, pizza, honestly, is a bread dough is not expensive, but somehow they had come up with the cheese. And I don't remember the toppings now. My favorite is pepperoni. So I'm not sure if they came with pepperoni or if it was sausage or hamburger or what it was, but it was the most delicious pizza I've ever tasted.
Yeah, you start to learn to appreciate that more. We would do pizza at La Brie too, but you'd spread your pepperonis out so that everybody could get a couple of pepperonis. So.
It was very fun. And, we never did feel like we were lacking in any way. It was always just delicious food and great fellowship, and you all just enjoyed the meals together. So that was a very fun time. And it sounds like La Brie is an exciting time as well for the people that go. Edith Schaeffer and her husband wrote lots of different books. And as you mentioned, they have different materials that you can read or listen to. I have a couple of books by Edith Schaeffer from years ago. It has been a long time since I've read them. One is La Brie, and it talks about what you talked about, the history of how the La Brie started in Switzerland. And another one is called The Hidden Art of Homemaking, Ideas for Creating Beauty in Everyday Life, where she encourages.
I have mine too. Yeah.
We have matching copies.
Yeah, that's right.
She encourages ladies in the art of homemaking and just talks about how to make a home beautiful and how important it is and what it does to bless your family and others who come in. And she just mentions the different arts. I won't read all of them, but anything from music to interior decoration to gardening, flower arrangements, food, and it goes on. And one of the things she mentions in food that I really appreciated was, she says, a man does not have to be the greatest chef in the world in order to enjoy the artistic fulfillment of cooking and serving a meal. A woman does not have to have a certificate from the Cordon Bleu or a home economics degree in order to develop both skill and creativity in planning menus and serving well-cooked meals. For both male and female cooks, the variety within any one meal should be thought of. Eye appeal as well as taste appeal should be remembered. For those cooking for 100 people, the beauty of each plate should be considered just as much as it should be for the person cooking for 2. A plate can be thought of at times as a kind of still life, not a lasting one, of course, but lasting in memory. And she talks about just how you can make something special even from something simple. And that's
Mhm.
a fun reminder, even as we cook for our families, that
Yeah.
we can set a beautiful table. Not that it has to be every single night, like you're pulling out all the stops, but she talks about
Mhm.
even a simple candle or some candles and a lone flower can really
Mhm.
make it appear special and beautiful and just set a tone of, I care for you.
Mhm.
Also, she continues a little bit later, a page or two later, she talks about what that does for a person's heart and soul. And I
Uh-huh.
think that is such an important part of being a homemaker, a mom who wants to serve her families. I mean, obviously, we think of when we have guests coming over how we want to make it special and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But every day we have that opportunity to bless our families through food
Mhm.
and through our hospitality. She says, well, now in the wintertime, this is going to come out in
Mhm.
the gray of winter. She says, when the
Mhm.
day is gray and the news is disappointing, you want to make the meal interesting and appealing. She says, children feel the difference in the home that takes this attitude. Father comes home tired and discouraged after some sort of failure or disappointment to find not food he dislikes or a burned soup and sloppy serving, but a beautifully set table with his favorite food served artistically and a hot drink or
Mhm.
tiny cookies or nuts served afterwards with the air of a special occasion. Or a
Mhm.
roommate receives a letter which is the dreaded reality of a fear long worried about, but comes back to the flat to find a meal prepared in anticipation in the comfort of hot broth and Melba toast. Omelet
Mhm.
and muffins and chocolate scalding hot, topped off by a marshmallow or whipped cream. Food cannot take care of spiritual, psychological, and emotional problems, but the feeling of being loved and cared for, the actual comfort of the beauty and flavor of food, the increase of blood sugar and physical well being help one to go on during the next hours better equipped to meet the problems.
Yeah.
And
She just really had her head around that. Yeah.
I love that
Uh,
part because it's so true. We recognize food is not going to change the problem. If someone is having
mhm.
a hard day or is sick or tired or whatever the problem is, it does not erase the fact that that problem is still there, but it can so uplift a person and bless them because of the love behind it. But also, God just created us as earthly creatures. We have
Yep.
earthly needs, and
Yep.
those needs include being nourished and
Yeah.
having food to give us energy. And how much more special if somebody's down to make their favorite whatever, or bring them a hot
Mhm.
drink or
Mhm.
whatever it is
Yeah,
that would bless that person the most.
I like what you were saying about, and what she says about doing this for your own families, right? Because a lot of us, we like in your podcast, there's a lot of focus there on coming over for dinner. So you're thinking about folks maybe you don't know quite as well. There's maybe a sense of anticipation or a desire to kind of elevate the standards of the presentation. But she really encourages us to think about doing that for our own families, our own people. And so one thing I think is that sometimes we need to raise the standards in our own homes and drop the standards for when we're inviting people over, because we're more likely to be concerned about what outsiders think of us and kind of disregard how our own folks feel here in our homes. But yeah, I think she's really challenged me to think about, like, how can I make my home cozy for my kids? Right?
Mhm.
Like, not just thinking about somebody else walking in the door, but what do we need to make it feel lovely for us?
Mhm.
And then out of that overflow, we'll be prepared to joyfully welcome newcomers that we don't know as well. And sometimes you feel like, I can't invite somebody over because I'm not prepared, my house is a mess. But what they really need is they need somebody to talk to, or they just need to feel welcomed. And you need to drop your standards a little bit and maybe break up some paper plates
Mhm.
for the strangers, but actually serve your family on some real china every now and
Mhm.
then. Because I think children can kind of, they just are so keen, and they can start to resent it if they feel like the only time our house is peaceful and calm and looks nice is when other people are here. But for us,
Right.
the standards are just, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so you never want people to get those priorities mixed up, right? And so
Well, and
yeah,
when
I
you
love
do
the way that
have
she
people
does that.
coming in and your children are helping and there's anticipation and they're cleaning and all of that, that does teach them a servant's attitude and blessing other people. But if they never feel
Right.
that in return themselves, like mom does this
Right.
for me too,
Yeah.
like you say, we are getting it backwards. The most important
Right.
thing is not the memories and the care that you show for people coming in. it should
Yeah.
be an overflow. I think you mentioned that as well, of what's
Mhm.
already happening. For me,
Mhm.
the most important thing when my kids were growing up and now that they're older, it's just so exciting to see, well, to hear their stories of the things they remember. And
Mhm.
as a mom, you don't even realize how important it was at the time or that they're holding on to that
Mhm.
memory. Like we don't know which memories they're going to have.
Right.
You
We
know,
didn't
they
get to pick.
totally forget some big giant birthday party that you spent all
Yeah.
this time on.
Right.
And they remember that one time that they were sick and on the couch and you brought them a tray and it had hot
Yeah.
tea and biscuits and scones. And
Right.
they remember the time that, I don't know, that just was you making them a priority, you giving
Yeah.
hospitality to them in a moment that they really needed, and it was very important to
Mhm.
them. So
Yeah.
those are fun things as they grow up to hear. You don't really know it now when you're raising kids, but later on
Right.
you'll hear what it is that they
Yeah.
held on to.
Right. You always did this. I remember doing that twice. Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't remember that at all.
Uh-huh.
I have a son. We tried to do, I don't know if I mentioned this on here or not before, but we tried to set aside, we had 5 children and we tried to occasionally do everybody goes to bed. All the kids are in bed, but one gets to stay up. When we would rotate
Oh.
who gets to stay up with mom and dad a little bit later, and then they go to bed after everybody else has gone to bed. And so my second son, he still remembers it was his turn and he got to come crawl in our bed and eat ice cream.
That is big.
And
Wow.
we
I don't
probably
know if I'm
watched a
quite there yet.
cartoon or who even knows? I don't know if we talked, watched a cartoon, what we did, but he remembers the Ben and Jerry's ice cream, the Cherry
Yeah.
Garcia. I loved Cherry Garcia and it is his favorite as well. But
Well, it's delicious.
yeah, it's
No.
delicious. It's absolutely delicious. He still remembers and talks about it to this day. And I'm sure I was just so tired and like, oh, it's his turn. We really need to do it, not put it off, you know. And
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. Did he get any ice cream on the sheets?
no, no,
There you go.
he was old enough.
Awesome.
He didn't. We had a great time. And then we
Good.
also did pajama parties
Oh,
where
fun.
they're all in their pajamas heading to bed. And it's like, okay, right out to the trampoline. We had a trampoline that had a net around it. And so there'd be
Uh-huh.
blankets out there and we'd all lay and look at the stars. And
Oh, that's
always have
awesome.
food, but a lot of times I tried to have some fun little snack, popcorn and then,
Mhm.
but as my daughter, I have one daughter, she was old enough to make cookies. And so if she knew about one coming up, she would try to make snickerdoodles or some special, or maybe she would even try to plan it. She would be like, so mom, if I make snickerdoodles, can we have a pajama party?
That's great. We have family room camp out where every now and then, I mean, we haven't done this part in a while. Like we'll actually set up our tent, our family room's big enough to do this, like set up a tent in the family room because where we live, it's not quite feasible to do it outside. We were in a
That's
neighborhood and
magical.
yeah. And we get out our sleeping bags and we eat popcorn and maybe watch a movie. So that's quite not exactly like camping, but man, it just really scratches an itch for them and they just love it. So, and
Oh,
then, usually they all go up to their own beds eventually. Not always, some of them do. Yeah.
oh,
But
that's something they'll remember forever. They'll
yeah,
treasure it. They'll treasure
yeah,
those times that it does take a little bit of extra effort, a little bit of extra
right,
cleanup at the end of it all,
right,
but it is so worth it
right.
to extend yourself and show that kind of hospitality to your kids.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of hospitality, you are a pastor's wife. You do have 3 young
hmm
children, and you are hospitable yourself as far as not just to your family, but to having other people in. Just like with Labrie, you are working
hmm
on budgeting while feeding large groups. So tell me
hmm
about one of the favorite things that you would serve if you were having a group into your home.
Sure. So I kind of mentioned that sometimes we need to drop the standards a little bit for folks coming into our home. And sometimes, especially sometimes people in ministry, we never mean to be intimidating, but people feel a little intimidated coming into a ministry house. Sometimes they were like, this is the pastor. I've got to be in my best behavior. And there's sometimes a bit of a tension or I don't know. You want to help them relax. As sometimes, unless they're already good friends of yours, you want to help people relax. So the menu that I chose is actually a lunch menu. I'm a little more often serving lunch to folks these days rather than dinner because my kids go to bed so early. And that lunch that I chose was from the Pioneer Woman's website. It's called Mulligatawny. And Mulligatawny soup is, I think it's like a British colonial thing. Like it's sort of faux Indian curry soup, but it's tasty. And I would serve it over rice with maybe some bread and a salad and then some kind of dessert. But what I would do, this is not a time saver, but it can be done beforehand, is I would boil a whole chicken. So this is a recipe that I would serve at Liberty usually a couple times a term, and found that it was satisfying in part because you're boiling this whole chicken and you get to use the broth that the chicken is boiling in, and that really bulks up the soup when you're making it with its own, and you keep back some of that fat. Right. So you're getting the calories and you're getting some of the protein. And then the recipe that the Pioneer Woman has on her website calls for half and half or cream. And I suggest actually switch that out for a can of coconut milk. If you're just doing a single recipe, 2 cans if you're doubling the recipe, and then do everything else the same, and it's going to taste delicious. You can make it gluten-free by when you're making the little roux for the thickener, use gluten-free flour. Nobody can tell the difference. My husband's gluten-free, and that's what we always do. And then the other fun thing about this recipe is it calls for a Granny Smith apple in the savory soup. And that's a little unusual, and it makes the flavor like have a tang to it. That's kind of cool and nice. And then, yeah, you can double this recipe really easily. And then I make some rice on the side, and then you ladle it over rice, and you have this really satisfying meal. So you might even find that you don't need to use all that chicken that comes from that boiled bird, and you can save some of that chicken. And I've often been able to stretch that chicken real far, depending on how large it was, when you boiled it at first.
If you double the recipe, do you need 2 chickens or just 1 for a double recipe?
So again, it kind of depends on the size of the bird. So in Switzerland, we were using Swiss chickens. They don't import a lot of meat into their country. And so it's all like local. And sometimes those birds are kind of small. And so you would need to use 2. And we just happen to have those giant restaurant size soup pots where you could do 2 at once. At home here where I live, you can find a pretty substantial sized chicken, and you can double that recipe and still have chicken left over with 1 kind of fatty bird. So it just depends on how many pounds it is. And there they were all in kilos, right? And so I'm having a hard time remembering like how many grams of chicken or how many. It was very loosey-goosey.
Sure, you can just go by what it looks like. And if you pull up a spoonful, is there chicken in there? Is there no chicken in there?
Yeah,
you can kind
exactly.
of eyeball
and
it.
Then you can bulk it up with whatever vegetables you have. I think it calls for celery and onions, but you can add peas, you can add green beans, you can throw in a lot of other veggies to bulk this up and make it a really substantial kind of a stew situation. So
that sounds delicious and very filling and hearty for wintertime.
And it's honestly, it's a humble recipe. Like if you didn't use the coconut milk, if you used just chicken breast, it would be not quite as company worthy, but still totally worthy for a friend, and totally achievable and approachable. But I do recommend boiling the chicken because it really makes it more substantial and caloric because sometimes you need that. And then you can use that stock in all sorts of ways because it can make a lot of stock.
Mm-hmm.
So
does the original recipe call for boiling a chicken, or does she start with chicken breast?
She just starts with chicken breast. She dices it up and she starts with chicken breast. And so that's again, we would never buy chicken breast up in Switzerland. I don't even know. Yeah, they sold them and they'd be like $13, $14 or something for a pack of 2 skinny little ones. And
wow.
So it was literally half the price to buy the entire bird, and you get white and dark meat that way.
Mm-hmm. And you're able to make your own chicken stock because you have all the bones.
Yes. Right. And I can be a little I can just dry chicken breast out so easily when I cook chicken breast. And so this I feel is a little more foolproof for me, especially when you're cooking for a large group of people. I just am so phobic about either undercooking chicken or just cooking it beyond palatability. And so so sometimes boiling it for me or doing it maybe in an Instapot feels a lot more okay, I'm confident it's cooked. I'm confident it's not going to taste weird. So
yeah, you're keeping the moisture in because you're not double cooking it, cooking it to death.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take a quick break. Are you searching for hands-on activities to help your kids explore the practical side of science? Look no further than your kitchen. Inquisicook blends food science and culinary arts into an engaging program that puts delicious food on the family table. Let Inquisicook do the teaching with lesson videos, reliable recipes, and assessment tools that put students on track for success. Their online platform is easy to navigate and optimized for mobile, so the learning experience can move from the classroom to the kitchen without a hitch. Inquisicook turns curious students into intuitive cooks, not just recipe followers. Say goodbye to the tyranny of the ingredients list and say hello to utilizing what's in season, what's on sale, or what's in the fridge. Visit inquisicook.com to view sample lessons, then check out the recipe gallery to see just how crave-worthy science can be. So
Exactly.
you mentioned serving it over rice. It has vegetables in it, so that does seem like a very complete meal. Do you ever serve bread on the side or a dessert, anything else with it to round it out?
Yeah. So when I was in Switzerland, we would make bread constantly. That was a big part of the community there. And I don't make it as much at home because my husband is gluten-free and I have not gotten the confidence to figure out yeasted gluten-free bread yet. And so I'll buy the bread usually just because he can't enjoy my homemade bread with that because it's gluten-free, because he's gluten-free and the bread is not. But we would make rolls usually to go with this, just like a real simple, you could do it in 3 hours sort of roll. It did take a double rise, but it would be done in 3 hours and it would make a lot. And then, with a green salad and dessert usually. And if you're on a tight budget, something like no-bake cookies, made with just the cocoa and the and the
oats are so cheap. Simple.
Yeah, the children really like those, and young adults don't mind them. They'll still enjoy them, right? So that's what we would normally do. And then every now and then there's also something, and I've heard other folks on your podcast mention it, called like a wacky cake, which is this Depression era recipe that was made without eggs. It was like oil and vinegar were the leaveners in the cake, and you could do it even all in one. I don't have a recipe for it right in front of me, but you can Google it, a wacky cake, and you make these wells in the cocoa and the flour, and you add these different ingredients. That would be pretty good too.
And very economical, sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some of these kind of Depression era recipes that are suitable for when things are on a tight budget. I do think there's definitely a place for event cooking where you're cooking steak and potatoes for folks. And we do that too, especially when there's somebody that we're really trying to honor or thank. But it can really drop the intimidation level to bring folks into your home when you're serving soup, right? Mm-hmm. So it feels so approachable.
Yes, it's definitely a comfort food. People never mind a good soup, especially in the wintertime.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Especially when it's cold outside. With this recipe, is there a shortcut or time saver you use to make it ahead of time?
Yeah, so we would not do that when we were in Switzerland. We would usually cook a whole meal within a 3-hour time frame or a 2.5-hour time frame, and that would be enough. But if you wanted to make it ahead of time, you can totally boil a chicken the day before. You can even put the chicken on to boil, bring it to a boil, put it down to simmer, go run an errand or two, depending on how far away you live from your stores and stuff, and come back, and then it'll be ready to shred. Then put the chicken in a really good container and pour some of the broth over it, and then save the rest of that stock. You'll see the fat divide, from the broth. And if you want to skim that off or leave a little bit, you can do that. Because you're putting the chicken back into a soup, you don't have to worry about it getting weirdly dry or freak out about the texture too much. Because sometimes chicken, when you save it, the texture changes a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't. But so you can do that. You can also do this with chicken breast in an Instapot, and that works too. It will not produce the same kind of stock though. Mm-hmm. And then you would just be using boxed or some other kind of chicken broth. So it's not going to be quite as, well, it would be less fat, but it wouldn't be quite as substantial. So you would want to bulk it up with cream and both recipes call for the coconut milk. So there's a couple of different things you could do. You could even, I know they have canned chicken in the grocery store, and you could try that. It does affect the flavor and everything, but you can get there with it.
Most soups are very forgiving, where you can play around with it and still turn out okay. Although, like you're saying, there are better ways to make it, the more flavorful ways that you could make it the other way and it'd be okay.
And, I've made the whole soup the day before and then rewarmed it in the crock pot And you want to make sure you're doing it. It depends on how much time you're doing. Like I just have served cold soup to folks before by doing that. And so you want to make sure that it gets hot enough. Like all soup, they get better after a day or something. And
Sure.
so
And if you were short on
do all
time,
of
you
it
could
ahead of
just
time.
dump it in a pot for the stove instead of the crock pot and heat it up a little bit quicker.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So thankfully it is something that you can really do ahead of time while you're cleaning, boil that chicken, that kind of thing.
What is your best prep tip when you're having people over? Do you have any particular cooking inspiration, shopping tips, cleaning tips for us?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple. So shopping inspiration, if you're on a budget, there's a website that I've heard mentioned on your site or on your podcast before called budgetbites.com, BYTES. She does a really great job of calculating how much a recipe will cost per head. And that's a good way to kind of think about your prep. So sometimes what we'll do in my home is if we know that we want to have a special meal sometime this week, either with friends or just with our family, we'll have lower budget or vegetarian meals other days of that week. And so if you want to budget for something special or more unique or something that takes unique ingredients, you can think about having lentils, at another point in your week, or some kind of vegetarian curry or something like that. And then that will save some of your budget so that you can use it on a nicer protein and some other kind of meal. So we would do that kind of thing in Switzerland quite a bit, budget, and then have a more special or elevated meal another time in the week. So there's one way to kind of think about it. The other thing is that I think a lot of folks have mentioned cleaning ahead of time. And it's nice if you can keep your home in a relatively ready to tidy position. You can do spontaneous hospitality a lot more calmly, right? Mm-hmm. So we have areas in our home that we try to keep a little bit tidier so that if somebody just needs to come over, all we have to do is tuck the toys away, put the paper clutter in the laundry room, and feel like we're able to calmly welcome folks.
Right, because people are not usually going all over your entire house. You don't have to have every single bedroom perfectly tidy. No. Another really great tip for the main areas is just teaching your children how to pick up after themselves as they're leaving the room. And so if it's continually a habit of just take your items with you, whether it's dropped shoes or a coat or a book, if it's left there time after time after time, then it's this huge cleanup. But if they get into the habit of care, just before you leave the room, look around, grab your things, take them with you to your room or wherever they go, then you're right. The unexpected hospitality can happen a little more readily because those rooms, let's say the living room, dining room area, is just not a total blitz.
Yeah, totally.
20 different items to pick up.
Yeah. One prep tip that I have, hot tip, if you have dogs, and I've got dogs, and they are a little bit naughty and they can make messes, right? Especially in the wintertime. So I have these 2 miniature dachshunds and they're really phobic of cold. And sometimes they're just naughty in the wintertime and we have to clean up after them. So I have a steam vacuum cleaner. It's called a Hoover Smart Wash. And I use it a lot to clean up after my dogs. And also I have a tiny baby that I like. It's important for babies to be on the floor, right? And so I like my carpets to be really clean. And our home, we live in a parsonage or a manse. And so we don't have absolute control over the nature of our home, right? It's wonderful and I am so grateful for it. But we didn't build it. We moved into it when my husband took this position and we're so thankful for it, but it's heavily carpeted. And so to keep those carpets clean and ready for babies, I like to steam clean my carpets. I used to almost subscribe to Stanley Steamer is the company around here that does, and it was so expensive. It was so expensive to do that. So for the same price, the price of one visit from Stanley Steamer, I bought a steam vacuum cleaner. And I'm on my second one now in 6 years because I use it so often, but it really gets your carpets clean.
It's worth every penny. So every time you vacuum, is it steam vacuuming or do you press another button that does a separate
question. So
cleaning?
This might seem so extra to some people, but again, for me, it's really given me peace of mind. I vacuum with my Dyson, my regular vacuum cleaner first. I actually vacuum kind of every day because we're tracking in so much salt and ice melt right now that I just feel like I need to, again, so the baby can crawl on the floor and I don't have to worry about her putting ice melt in her mouth. And then, so you quickly go over your dry carpets with your vacuum cleaner. And because you're vacuuming semi-regularly, it's not catching that much stuff. And then you put water in the steam vac, and it has a solution tank, and the solution mixes with the water. And as you're pushing the machine forward, it's dispensing the soap in the water. And then as you pull it back, it's drawing it into the, I guess it's called the intake tank, and it's drawing out all of the dirt and all of the yucky stuff out of your carpet. And you can see that water's black when you're pulling it out. And then you pull the solution tank out, and you go over it one more time, and it kind of rinses your carpet. You pull it back one more time, and it gets all the soap out of your carpet. So sometimes when you hire a steam cleaning company, they will shampoo your carpets, but they're not necessarily rinsing your carpets. And so you'll get this kind of sticky residue on your carpet. They call them ghosts, like these ghost spots on the carpet. You'll see from where your feet are, your footprints are, or whatever. It'll track in some dirt, and it might even look worse than it did before eventually. It smells better, but it looks worse. And so it's kind of good to do a rinse if you can, and get that rinse, or if you had sprayed any particular stain remover on your rugs, to get that stain remover out, and then it gets all of the yucky stuff out too. So I do that every time I need to. And because I do it often enough, I feel like confident with the kids playing on the carpet. It helps with allergies. It helps with just all sorts of dirt and stuff.
Do you take shoes off at the door?
A lot of people in Chicago do. I don't. I just have mats, kind of water absorbent mats by my doors. And I encourage people, especially, I just feel like usually if you have somebody coming over and they don't know you very well, they've thought about what they're wearing, right? Like, it's so funny to have like a really nicely dressed couple walk into your home, and then they have to take off their heels and shoes and like walk around in stocking feet. And
if they're not prepared with extra slippers or something, their feet are going to be frozen.
Right. And some folks, I've been at homes that they have like a little tidy basket of just like neutral slippers that are gender neutral, and people can slip them on, and that's fine. I just don't want people to feel like they need to take their feet. I don't
well,
like,
and if you clean your floors often and you have a really great way of steam cleaning them, that's a perfect second option.
Right. Children, I do say, hey guys, let's take our shoes off. Let's put them on the water mat to take, let those boots dry up and everything. And they'll be more comfortable that way. And that way they're not tracking their boots around. But kids, grown-ups, I say, do whatever you want. If you want to keep your shoes on, great. I've got a steam vacuum cleaner, so it doesn't matter.
Right. Does the steam cleaner also work on hardwood floors? Like, could you do it, say, on your kitchen floor, or no, it only works on carpet?
So I have hardwood and a little bit of tile in my home, and no, you wouldn't use it. I think it would be too wet. So my wood floors, I inherited them, and they've got a little bit of water damage, and so you got
if they're not sealed, that's too. I mean, they do have to be sealed, but even if they're sealed, I'm sure that they're not supposed to have a lot of water on them.
So I do know that there are machines. So there are machines that will do like a hot steam sort of clean for hardwoods and for tile, but it's not this product. And I don't have one of those. My mother-in-law owns her own business and has one of those machines for her business, because it's a food business. She has to keep it clean. And she just takes that thing over to her house, and her house gets so clean because of that. But it's like a different kind of apparatus. I don't know what that is. So, yeah.
And I think with those, you have to be careful if your floor is glued down, that you're not holding the steam too long in one place. I would just say research that too for wood floors, because I've heard of that before. Like, potentially if you did it fast, or if you did a lower level of steam versus a high. But I don't know, I've heard someone talk about how if you hold it there, you could mess up some kind of glue underneath. So, but I do love that option to be able to steam clean a floor, because it really does kill all the germs and releases, if that heat will also pick up sticky things, or all the things that if you're washing with, say, lukewarm water, it's going to be a lot tougher to get the job done.
Right. So that's one of my tips, is that if you have dogs and if they're naughty, consider something like this. It might make your life easier. I've had friends who've seen me use mine, and they're like, well, I'm going to get one of these just because of, we have so much carpet. In my dream house, there would be no carpet. I would just do dry vacuuming all the time when sweeping and that kind of thing, and mopping. But yeah, we're thankful for what we got, and we just want to take good care of it, and also be ready for babies and kids and play on the floor, because we spend so much time on the floor. So
yes. Yeah. Oh, that's a great option. What is your best advice for showing warm hospitality to those coming into your home? How do you make them feel welcome?
I think that it's important never to make assumptions about your guests. So when folks, especially if, I mean, people, you can invite your friends over and or folks that you feel a connection with, and they'll feel more relaxed, but people never know where to put their coats. They don't know about their shoes. Should I take my shoes off? Can I keep them on? Like we do a lot of orientation. So even about the food in Switzerland, we had so many people coming from all over the world. We realized that people don't know what you're serving. Like they don't know. So we would make biscuits and gravy for breakfast. And the European folks would be like, what is this? Like biscuits, but they're savory. It's a savory dish. And like, you know, the gravy doesn't necessarily look totally appetizing. And so we'd be like, first of all, you need to try it because it's amazing. Secondly, it's a savory dish, right? Biscuits, we're not talking about cookies. Even
that's true. I wasn't even thinking of that, but it's true. In England, biscuits are little tea cookies, right?
Yeah, and they're kind of crunchy and thin. It's just a different thing. They're like, it's closer to a scone, of course, what we're serving with biscuits and gravy, but it's not. I think probably they would not say that's a scone. You know, a buttermilk biscuit is not a scone to them. And you know, I have like one kind of amusing story is for lunch. Sometimes what we would serve along with our soup would be like a sandwich sort of situation where we'd pass around the rolls and then there'd be a little bit of sandwich meat and you could make yourself a mini sandwich to eat with your soup. And then I would put a plate of cookies on the table. And while the students are having kind of this intense conversation, they'd be able to pass, you know, everything's family style. So they pass the food around while they're having these conversations that are pretty significant. So you try to give as much orientation as you can. And then they're discussing something like the problem of evil or something. And you want to be like, everybody stop. We need to discuss the food. So there was this lovely young man from South Korea who was at the table with us. And I'm watching him and he's making himself a sandwich and he's got his soup, he's got his bun, and he takes the snickerdoodle cookie and he puts it right on that bun, puts the bun on top and just starts dipping it into his soup and eating it. And I realized, of course, that looks like a weird little meat patty to him. Like he doesn't know, he has no idea what he's about to eat. And so, and just keeping like a totally straight face while he's like eating this weird
pseudo-American sandwich.
You know, and I was just thinking, like, what on earth? He must be so like miserable and not saying anything.
Did you stop him and tell him?
I think, you know, I don't know. I actually don't know. I remember how that story came out, but they were just like the kindest, most accommodating, like generous folks, and probably just thought like, wow, this is kind of delicious, but sort of a weird combination of flavors. So
Americans cook very strange.
we learned that never assume, or we'd make spaghetti pie with garlic bread, and that some folks, our Korean friends, would never have had that in their lives. They just never, and they just devoured it. They just adored it. So, you know, in some cuisines, they just don't eat a lot of dairy, or they don't, you know, there are just certain things that they've just never had, and so you just really need to explain it. And other advice, she'd always have flowers on her table. And that was just another way, you know, we'd have these kitchen work crews, and it was a really cool opportunity to teach young people how to cook, how to prepare meals, and also how to make a warm home. And so we'd always have somebody going out and collecting a flower arrangement of wildflowers or flowers from the property. Other folks have said this, but I actually think music really sets people at ease. It's one of the cues that you are not resenting them coming to your house, right? Like, we are having a good time before you walked in the door. We're ready for you. Even if we're still like doing stuff, the music sets a real mood of joy and ease. And it's just a signal to folks that you are in like what your mood is. You know what I mean? And so music, I think, is a really helpful way to kind of help people feel the tone of what's going on.
Do you have any favorites, or do you make a playlist ahead of time?
Yeah, you know, you're always, especially with folks you don't know what they like. But one thing that I've found is pretty consistently delightful is the Buena Vista Social Club channel on Pandora. So I think that's bossa nova music. It's from Cuba. And it's just lovely to have. It's really like fun and Latin sounding, but also celebratory.
Say the name of it one more time.
So there's a documentary. I haven't seen it. I don't know if I can recommend it, but it's called the Buena Vista Social Club.
Buena Vista Social Club. Okay.
And they have a soundtrack, and I think that it's called bossa nova music. I might be wrong, Beth, but it's Latin music, and it's just delightful. And they've got the sound quality of that particular album is really nice, and it's it makes you feel kind of joyful but relaxed at the same time. And it's not in English, so you're not distracted by lyrics and that kind of thing. So
Yeah, it's just a
anyway,
fun, upbeat music.
yeah. Yeah. So I recommend that. And also, this might be an obvious to some folks, but make it clear whether or not children are invited or expected. So sometimes when you're inviting a family over, they can't tell if you're just inviting like the parents and they should get a sitter, or if you're inviting the whole family. And I think it might be different where you guys are, but around here, people don't invite families of 7 over very often. And so it's really special to say, bring everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to all enjoy, like we've got toys, your kids can play. But I think the reflex where we are is for people to say, oh, we're invited, but we need to find a sitter. And so to make it clear that, nope, we're, just make that clear. Just say it, one way or the other. Or if you want to say like, hey, you want to go in on a babysitter together and we'll get together just for some grown-up conversation, you can make that clear too. But again, just don't make assumptions,
Don't leave them wondering what to do. And
it's awkward. It feels awkward over it. So should I get a sitter? So,
right. Are you inviting my children too? Are they welcome? Or do you not want my children? Yes, that is awkward. What is your must-have kitchen item and where can we find it?
So I've heard people mention on your podcast kitchen shears. I've found that somebody gave me kitchen shears when I got married and I was like, what is this? And I use them constantly. Another thing is, my kitchen scale. I use my kitchen scale all the time. And part of that was at Labrie. We were using a lot of recipes that called for grams and kilograms and that kind of thing. And found that I got really used to that. Also, if at any point in somebody's life they're watching their portion sizes, the kitchen scale can kind of help you get your head around what a normal portion size is. If like you're like me and during pregnancy, your portion sizes grow and grow and grow, there comes a time where you need to get your head around what a normal portion size is again. And that can kind of help you realize, oh, this is what 2 ounces of pasta is or whatever. So I use mine almost every meal. It just helps me to kind of make healthy choices and to realize like, wow, that's a lot of cheese or something like this. But for baking, it's really great for baking. Mm-hmm. And because I do convert a lot of recipes from regular to gluten-free, sometimes if you're using any of these gluten-free flours, it'll help you sort of get your head around that because they don't always, I don't know. Sometimes maybe I'm overly cautious about that, but it'll help you with the weight of those things.
Well, for sure. Because when you're baking, if you do too much of something, you make your product dense and the final result is not very tasty. So you even want if you're doing gluten-free, you want it to be just as airy and light and delicious as if it weren't gluten-free.
Right.
And if you, having lived in Europe, if you're converting European recipes at all, they often use a kitchen scale. I mean, in your experience, did they have one at every meal pretty much? Like just every time you made bread or biscuits where people were weighing out the flour and the ingredients versus measuring it with measuring cups like we do in America?
We did both. So we had brought over American measuring cups and American spoons. That was actually harder to find where they're like measuring spoons. We did do both and the students would do both. But when you would go to a worker's home, so we had like a student house that had more of an American style kitchen, but at the worker's home, so we found that we were using kitchen scales quite a bit. And usually there were these digital ones that would just, they're real low profile and you could put your bowl on there, you tear your bowl, T-A-R-E, tear it, so it zeroes out. You put your stuff in there, tear it out again, put the next thing in there, tear it out again, put the next thing in there. And you found that you could get really consistent results by doing that for different recipes. So that was really, really helpful for us. Another item that I use a lot is somebody bought me a little mini knife sharpener. It's called the Kitchen IQ knife sharpener. And you just set it on the corner of a table and draw your knife through it and it files down the knife. It's probably not a product you would want to use on a really high-end knife, but I got my knives 15 years ago from Target and they're still fine because of this thing. So if you don't have it in your budget to get a really nice set of knives, this little knife sharpener, I think can really make your stuff sharp. You just really need to make sure you rinse your blades afterward and kind of make sure you get those metal filings down into your sink or in the trash can or something so that you don't get little metal filings in your food. But yeah.
Is that a product on Amazon?
Yeah. So I think I sent you the link for it, but it's a really basic little device that it's just tiny. It's like this big and you set it on the corner and it sharpens up your knife. So,
oh, that's great.
only like a regular, kind of butcher knife situation, but not like a serrated knife, of course. But yeah.
Yes,
So,
serrated knives are a bit different.
mhm.
Well, that's a great tip. I do have a couple other knife sharpeners, but not one like this on the shop page at comeoverfordinner.com. So if you want to see her recommended products, I will post them there, and her recipes will be on the index as well as on a blog post under recipes. I think that, yeah, the title's recipes where your blog post is, and then the index has it alphabetized by category. So any of these things that she's talking about, go to comeoverfordinner.com and you will find it. It's very fun, I think, to find recipe inspiration there. Because I release an episode every week, I don't always stay caught up on making all of the things people recommend.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really fun to go to the index and be like, oh, yeah, I did want to make that. That
Yeah.
sounded delicious when they talked about it.
Right.
So I've been slowly doing that, pulling things off of the index when I feel like, oh, what do I make? There's nothing to cook. I don't even know what I like to make anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I get
Yeah,
really
I've enjoyed
excited
using
about
it
cooking
too.
again.
Right. Especially because they're tried and true, like you were saying. And so that's a helpful they're not totally experimental necessarily. So yeah.
Right. People are bringing some of their favorites that they've tried and that their family loves
Mm-hmm.
and other people like too, and that they have made numerous times. So I love that part about it. Some really great
Yeah.
recommendations.
Right. Right. I think, one thing going with the soup that I mentioned earlier, like I said, when you're making that particular soup, you'll have extra meat most usually left over unless you're making the soup for a ton of people. You can do a lot of stuff with that extra meat. I sometimes will put it in like a broccoli braid, which is pampered chef recipe. Takes crescent roll dough. You can make enchiladas with it. There's just a lot of different things that you can make with extra shredded chicken in your life. So yeah, so if you're needing to stretch your protein across several different meals, there's a lot of different ideas for that. If you get a big enough bird, you can even get like 3 meals out of it, depending on the size of your family.
Yeah.
So,
well, and your Budget Bites recipe site sounds amazing as well, just to get inspiration and learn that a bit more. If you don't know how to budget well, if you're kind of overwhelmed by the prospect of feeding people for cheap, especially at the prices right now in the grocery stores, they're terrible.
Do you all have Aldi where you are?
Unfortunately, no. My sister in Arkansas does, but we do not. And I wish we did so much. There's a Trader Joe's about an hour and a half away in Spokane, Washington.
Oh, my goodness.
But no Aldi.
That's interesting because Aldi, I think it's like 3 to 5% cheaper even than Walmart. And so if you are in an area where you have Aldi, it's got real affordable prices.
Yes.
And
my sister shops there all the time. She loves it. And I've gone when I visit and I love it. But yes.
Yeah. I mean, you won't be overwhelmed by options, but you will really appreciate the prices. And so to have it for some of your most common things, it really can make a big difference.
She stocks her pantry with stuff. Like she'll go and just get a bunch of canned goods or whatever, and she just has it in stocks. So
right. Yeah.
Do you have a funny story for us from all your years of hospitality, or from Labrie, besides the snickerdoodle cookie?
The snickerdoodle cookie,
which is a pretty great story.
Yeah. One thing that I've learned is that I think that there are a lot of Reformed Presbyterian folks in South Korea, because we would have a lot of people from that particular country come and visit us there. And I think if you're a conservative Christian in South Korea, there might be a higher likelihood that you're attending a Presbyterian church. I might be totally wrong about this. Somebody from Korea could actually correct me. But we did find that at least at Labrie, there were a lot of folks coming from those communities when we were there. So one day, one of our responsibilities was that we would look after the community on Thursdays, which was the students' day off. The students would go and travel. They'd go sightseeing. Maybe they'd take a day trip somewhere, do an excursion on Thursdays. And my family would stay back. And we were just responsible for keeping an eye on the house and preparing dinner, which Thursday night was leftover night at Labrie. So you take all of the leftovers from all of the meals and you'd set them out in the lounge area. And it was a much more informal setup for Thursday nights. But because it was a day off, it was also like we kind of took it a little easier on Thursdays up until dinner time, because most of the time folks weren't around. And one afternoon, I was taking my dog out for a walk there around the property, like out by our garbage cans, kind of behind our building. and I feel this tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there's a woman, a really well-dressed woman, waving at me, like with a big smile on my face. And behind her are something like 50 Korean tourists and a big tour bus parked in our driveway. And I was wearing like the schlubbiest t-shirt, the schlubbiest sweatpants, no makeup, hair in a ponytail with my dog, and then holding my baby on my hip, and totally unprepared to meet the day of these. And these folks had come, and they were doing a Reformation tour. So L'Abri is really close to Geneva. If you ever want to visit like all the sites of Calvin's Geneva, it's amazing. You should totally do it. They had been down there in Geneva, I think probably the day before, visiting the Reformation Museum, visiting all the monuments, Calvin's Geneva. It's amazing. Then they hopped on the bus and they came up, we're just like maybe 2 hours, public transportation, probably less than that if you're taking a bus from Geneva. And they just dropped in, because in the L'Abri books, people did that all the time. People just dropped in. And Edith was constantly prepared to meet that challenge. I think she wore like heels most of the time. Like she just looked lovely. She had it together. She had this idea, and I really appreciate this, that her homemaking was a job, and she kind of met it every day like a professional, like she'd get up, she'd get ready in the morning, and she'd be ready for her day. And she had her head around her life as, I'm going to work at it like it's my job, whether I'm homemaking and that's it, or whether I'm welcoming folks. And so it was a really humbling and not very shining moment for me to show hospitality in a moment that I was like utterly unprepared, like wearing flip-flops, sweatpants, and a schlubby t-shirt, and wanting to show this community of folks who came to visit, all the amazing things about our campus, L'Abri, and the ministry. And I think what I honestly did was I found somebody who looked more presentable, and I passed them off. And some other staffers, and I was like, can you do me a solid and give it to her right now? Because I am just not prepared. And I've got the dog, I've got the baby. I need to kind of get my head around this. And I think I later pitched in with serving tea, because she would always, Edith would always be ready at a moment's notice to serve tea to 50 people. I mean, it felt like that from the legends, and we could kind of get that together for them, and they were able to explore the grounds and everything, and it worked out. But it was humbling for me to be a little more prepared for some spontaneous hospitality for the future. So
that's a great tip, to just, not that you can't ever be in sweatpants, but to just, when you wake up, especially if you are a stay-at-home mom at home all day long with the kids, you probably feel a little bit more prepared to meet the day when you get yourself ready for the day in the morning, not the whole entire day goes by and you're still basically in pajamas. Your hair hasn't been brushed, who knows if much else has happened. You feel just more ready to meet the challenges of the day. And like you said, very prepared if someone just knocks on the door.
Right. And I mean, it's not a huge part of our neighborhood culture to just knock on the door. But if you want to make hospitality part of your life, kind of thinking about those things ahead of time, like if you have control over the factors over the flow and size of your home, if you have control over the factors, even over your vehicles, like could you make it a space in your life for a pickup so that if somebody needs help with a move, that kind of thing. Hospitality in terms of just living a generous life is sort of a biblical call for all Christians, right? And so making sure that you kind of have your head around what does hospitality look like. And usually, in our culture, there's some kind of heads up that somebody's coming over, and so you have enough.
Most of the time people don't just drop in, which is a little bit of a blessing.
Yeah, totally.
And one thing I noticed is once my day starts, I don't have time to go back and get ready for the day.
Right.
I really do have to get ready in the morning, because the day just seems to fly at Mach speed once I get started.
Yeah, it does.
That's a good tip. Just throw on some decent clothes, whether or not you think a group of tourists is going to show up at your house.
Right. In a huge bus. And I think maybe one of them spoke English, and so we had to do some translation work. Oh dear.
They were probably just so excited to be there they didn't even notice. They probably were just thrilled to finally be at L'Abri, and it's beautiful surroundings, and they were taking it all in, and who cares what you look like. So you did
Yeah.
have a baby over there. I was thinking you went with your
So,
husband before
well,
children.
yeah, I met my husband there. A lot of people meet their spouses at Liberty, ladies. And if that's something that you're thinking about. And we met there when I was a student. Or I was on a helper. We met there when I was a helper back in 2006. We got married in 2007. We eventually got married in 2009. And then we returned to staff in 2016. So our son was 1 at that time. And so we had been back and forth a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was hard to do that kind of ministry with a baby. And we were living in the student house. That was our main position was we were responsible for that part of the community. And there were things that were challenging about that a lot of blessings too, and really got immersed in that hospitality sort of world and lifestyle, and feel so humbled because there's so many people that are still doing it with so much more ease and kind of grace. But we were really blessed to learn from the Schaeffers and from the folks that work there still about what it looks like to be really hospitable. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your tips and the things that you learned while you were there and continued to learn as you came back to America and now live in Chicago and are in a parsonage or manse and as a pastor's wife with 3 young children. So I appreciate you taking your time out of your day. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was just delightful.
Recently, I did a 3-part big hospitality series. I had a listener ask a follow-up question, and it had to do with how do you estimate the number of servers you need at a big event, and also how do you estimate the quantity of food you need. I answered those questions with the NSA crew. We worked a senior dinner last Saturday together, and I was able to grab everybody and do a quick question and answer time. So I have posted those answers as well as a new recipe for homemade yogurt over at Patreon. So go check out patreon.com. All you have to do is search Come Over for Dinner and you'll find everything over there. Be sure to check out the website for recipes from this episode as well as all the past episodes. It's at comeoverfordinner.com.
Until next time, bye for now.
Bye.